For 50 years, Hollywood pointed to one couple as proof that true love could survive fame, temptation, and time itself. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward were married for half a century. They raised a family together. They built a life that outlasted nearly every other Hollywood romance of their era. But this was never the fairy tale it appeared to be. Their marriage began with a betrayal. It was tested by infidelity, by alcohol, and by a loss no parent should have to survive. This is the real story of how Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward built the most enduring marriage in Hollywood history. Not because it was easy, but because they refused to let it fall apart. In 1953, Paul Newman was a young, ambitious actor trying to break into New York theater. He landed a role in the Broadway production of Picnic, working as an understudy alongside a talented young actress named Joanne Woodward. Their first meeting was far from cinematic. Woodward later admitted that her first impression of Newman was almost comical. She said he looked like an advertisement for an ice cream soda, and at the time, she found the image more amusing than appealing. There was a problem neither of them could ignore. Newman was already married. His wife, Jackie Wheat, had given him 3 young children, a son named Scott and 2 daughters, Susan and Stephanie. On paper, he was a family man building a life in the suburbs. But something shifted when Newman and Woodward were cast together again, this time in the film The Long, Hot Summer. Working closely on screen, playing each other's love interest, the professional chemistry between them turned into something neither could easily walk away from. What followed was not a quiet flirtation. It became a years-long affair, carried out largely behind closed doors, while Newman continued to live as a married father of 3. Decades later, in his own memoir, Newman would admit that leaving his first family was something he never fully forgave himself for. He confessed he was still too immature at that point in his life to make a first marriage last, and that guilt over the decision followed him for the rest of his life. In 1958, the marriage to Jackie Wheat finally ended in divorce. Newman married Joanne Woodward almost immediately afterward, in a quiet ceremony in Las Vegas. There was no lavish gown, no press spectacle, no fairy tale wedding photographs splashed across magazine covers. It was the quiet beginning of a marriage that the world would later hold up as the gold standard of Hollywood love. But it started with a family left behind, and a wound that never fully closed. Once married, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward became something rare in the industry. A couple who worked together, lived together, and somehow made both things work. Over the course of their marriage, they appeared in 16 films together. Audiences watched their on-screen chemistry evolve across decades, never quite sure where the performance ended and the real relationship began. Publicly, they looked like everything a Hollywood marriage was supposed to be. Newman was becoming one of the most bankable movie stars on the planet, with piercing blue eyes and a string of iconic roles. Woodward, meanwhile, had already won an Academy Award early in her career and was respected by critics as one of the most serious, dramatic actresses of her generation. For a while, it seemed like the perfect partnership. A leading man and a critically acclaimed actress, equally talented, equally in love. But underneath the surface, something uncomfortable was building. As the years passed, Newman's fame only grew. He moved through his 30s and 40s as one of the most desired men in America. Woodward's career, by contrast, began to stall. Despite her talent and her Oscar, the industry simply did not offer her the same opportunities it gave her husband. That imbalance created strain neither of them spoke about publicly, but it was strain that friends and biographers would later describe as a quiet, persistent tension running underneath their marriage. By 1969, The rumors of trouble in paradise had grown loud enough that Newman and Woodward felt compelled to respond. They took the extraordinary step of purchasing a full-page advertisement in the Los Angeles Times, publicly declaring their commitment to one another. Think about that for a moment. A couple secure enough in their fame to need no publicity, choosing instead to buy space in a major newspaper just to convince the public their marriage was still intact. It wasn't just image management. It was a sign of how much strain was actually building behind their golden reputation. That same year, 1969, while filming Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Paul Newman reportedly began an affair with a journalist named Nancy Bacon. According to biographer Sean Levy, who interviewed Bacon directly for his book, Paul Newman, A Life, the affair lasted roughly a year and a half. Bacon herself would later describe it as one of the worst-kept secrets in all of Hollywood. For Joanne Woodward, the betrayal cut especially deep. This wasn't a stranger's husband straying. This was the same man who had once left his first wife and 3 children to be with her. Now she was on the other side of that same pattern. There's a certain irony here worth sitting with. Newman was famous for a line he used publicly to explain his loyalty to his marriage. He would say there was no reason to go out for a hamburger when you had steak waiting at home. It became one of his most quoted lines. Audiences loved it. It painted him as the rare Hollywood leading man who resisted temptation. But according to his own biographer, that public image didn't match the private reality. Even as he offered that famous line to reporters, Newman was privately struggling with fidelity, and Woodward was privately absorbing the consequences. Somehow, the marriage survived. Woodward, by most accounts, was devastated by the affair, but she and Newman worked through it rather than separating. Friends who observed the marriage over the following years described a relationship that could be genuinely difficult, marked by real arguments, but never one that either of them seemed willing to abandon. Alcohol was another thread running through their story. Newman's drinking was well known throughout his career, and it added another layer of difficulty to an already complicated household. It wasn't the explosive, headline-generating chaos of some Hollywood marriages. It was something quieter, and in some ways harder to watch. 2 people who loved each other, working through real damage, mostly out of public view. If you're finding this story compelling so far, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We cover the real stories behind Hollywood's most iconic couples every week, and you won't want to miss what comes next in Paul and Joanne's story. In 1978, tragedy struck the Newman family in a way that no amount of fame or wealth could soften. Scott Newman, Paul's only son from his first marriage, died at the age of 28. The cause was a combination of drugs and alcohol, an accidental overdose that ended his life far too soon. For Paul Newman, the grief was inseparable from guilt. This was the son he had, in some sense, left behind decades earlier when he divorced Scott's mother to be with Joanne Woodward. Now, that same son was gone, and there was no way to go back and change any of it. Those close to the family later said that Newman carried the weight of Scott's death for the rest of his life. It's widely believed to be part of what motivated him to establish the Scott Newman Center, an organization dedicated to drug abuse prevention among young people, work he continued for decades afterward. For Joanne Woodward, this loss was complicated in its own way. She was not Scott's biological mother, but she had been part of his life since he was a young child. The tragedy became something the entire family had to carry together. Whatever unresolved tension still existed in the marriage. This is often the part of long marriages that gets left out of the highlight reel. It's easy to celebrate 50 years together. It's much harder to talk about what actually holds 2 people together during the worst moment either of them will ever live through. According to their daughter Melissa, this period, and others like it, revealed something important about her parents' relationship. She would later describe an atmosphere in the household that came and went, a kind of tension that never fully disappeared, even during the best years. But she also said something else. She said that what actually kept her parents together for 50 years, even through the worst of it, was their shared determination to keep fighting for the relationship itself. That distinction matters. Paul, Newman, and Joanne Woodward's marriage was not free of conflict. It survived because neither of them treated conflict as a reason to leave. Decades after their wedding, the world got an unexpectedly intimate look into what actually made this marriage work when Newman's posthumous memoir was published in 2022, 14 years after his death. In it, Newman spoke candidly about the physical and emotional connection he shared with Woodward, describing her as the reason he ever felt confident as a romantic partner at all. He admitted that before meeting her, he had struggled badly with insecurity, even describing his younger self as awkward and unsure around women. Woodward, according to Newman, changed that entirely. Their daughters later confirmed just how playful that side of the marriage really was. The couple reportedly had a private space in their Beverly Hills home, a converted room off the master bedroom, furnished with an old thrift store bed that Woodward had decorated herself with obvious affection. It became a private joke between them, a space just for the two of them, separate from the demands of fame, family, and work. Their daughter, Melissa, helping compile a photo book about her parents years later, said that going through decades of personal letters between them, she found herself constantly torn between wanting to include everything and realizing some things were simply too private and too playful to share with the public. What emerges from all of this isn't a portrait of two people who never struggled. It's a portrait of two people who, whatever else was happening around them, never lost the thread of genuine attraction and partnership that first drew them together on a New York stage in 1953. That combination, real hardship paired with real intimacy, is probably the most honest explanation for why this marriage lasted when so many other Hollywood unions didn't. Paul, Newman, and Joanne Woodward remained married until his death in 2008 at the age of 83. By then, their marriage had lasted 50 years, a length of time almost unheard of among Hollywood's biggest stars. In the years since, Joanne Woodward has lived quietly, largely out of the public eye. She has been open, through her family, about living with Alzheimer's disease, a diagnosis that has understandably limited her public appearances in recent years. Their daughters have continued to share pieces of their parents' story, including through a book called Head Over Heels, featuring more than 100 photographs, many of them never before seen publicly, documenting the couple's life together from their earliest years to their final ones. What their family has consistently emphasized, more than the fame or the films or the decades of headlines, is the idea that this marriage was never a fairy tale. It was a real relationship between two flawed, talented, deeply human people who happened to spend 50 years choosing each other again and again, even when choosing each other was genuinely difficult. That may be the most important lesson buried inside this story. The marriages that last aren't necessarily the ones without pain. They're the ones where both people keep showing up anyway. Paul, Newman, and Joanne Woodward's marriage was never the perfect Hollywood fantasy the public wanted it to be. It began in betrayal. It survived infidelity, addiction, and the kind of grief most parents never have to face. And yet it lasted 50 years, longer than almost any other marriage in Hollywood history. Maybe that's exactly why their story still matters. Not because it was easy, but because they refused to let it end. Now it's time to hear from you. Do you think a marriage can survive real betrayal and still become something worth admiring? Let us know in the comments below. And before you go, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more real stories behind Hollywood's most legendary couples.